unfiltered moisture.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, listen, we're creeping up on 8:15. I want to, before we call our first guest, I want to give a big thank you to Paladin Press and Black Belt Magazine for their plugs for our interview here with Jim Arvanitis. Truly appreciate that. But the gentleman that we're about to be talking to, as I put my papers aside and start dialing a number here, Jim I got to say this right, Jim Arvanitis.
Arvanitis.
There we go. I keep screwing that up. Jim Arvanitis. This guy, he put it simply, he is the founder of Neopankration, which is a blend of the remnants of the old pankration from Greece, but mixed in with some Western boxing, some Greco-Roman wrestling, a little Muay Thai and combat judo. He's been at it, back in '73, he was featured on the cover of Black Belt Magazine, and that's when his hybrid fighting system was unveiled, to the mainstream as a mainstream martial art. But without further ado, I'm going to put this phone number in here and make things happen for us. And hopefully my phone will dial up.
Put this out just in case he doesn't partake. He doesn't want to hear me hitting this doobie.
I got you. Phone is ringing. Well, we're ringing.
Hello?
Hi, good evening, Jim.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Big Perm with UMOR. You're on live with me and my host, Dave the Butcher Clifford. How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great.
Well, listen, I didn't say your last name in the beginning because I didn't want to mispronounce it. Me and Dave have been going back and forth on how it's pronounced. Could you give us the proper pronunciation of your last name?
Sure. If it's anglicized, it's Arvanitis, and if it's more in the Greek flair, it's Arvanitis.
All right.
What? Well, dang it. Well, we both win. I went and researched this. Let me tell you before we get into this, and it's a pleasure. This is Dave the Butcher. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Jim.
Hey, Dave.
And I was looking all over, and it's hard to find because I plugged it into these pronunciation sites, and they all said Arvanitis, and I said, I don't think that's it. That doesn't feel right to me. So I finally found a Greek newscast that was talking about how Arvanitis cheese was surviving the economic crisis in Greece, and I went, that's it. The only word I understood in the entire broadcast, but I caught it, and I went, that's it. So welcome to the show.
Well, thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks. If you're talking to a Greek, of course, you use Arvanitis, they'll just kind of look at you, and they won't understand what the heck you're talking about. But Arvanitis, that's a little different. Now they know what you're talking about.
Well, I'm gonna use Arvanitis.
Sounds good to me.
Me too. That'll work for me. Well, and at this point, I'm just going to call you Jim and make it really nice and easy.
Sure.
Well, Jim, let's just kick this off. You yourself, you're known as the founder of Neopankration, and I mean, you basically resurrected Pankration, the old school Greek style. Considered the original MMA, over 40 years ago, back at a time when traditional systems like karate and kung fu, they seemed to dominate the scene. What really prompted you to do this, since mixing the martial arts skills was pretty much unheard of at that time?
Well, there were quite a few reasons. First off, let me start by saying that I come from a wrestling and a boxing background. And, back then, nobody looked at wrestling and boxing as martial arts, just as combat sports. And so I competed in both. I started a local YMCA in the Boston area when I was about 7 years old. And later I studied boxing in Lowell, Mass., which was the hub of boxing at the time, with the noted Susi brothers. And they always had these well-known boxers coming in, like Marvin Hagler and all these other dudes, and I mean, working out with those guys was just amazing experience.
Wow.
So Lowell was really the place if you really wanted to get into boxing at the time. So I really got into a good school. I mean, it wasn't a real plush place. It was kind of dingy, your typical boxing gym you might see in a Rocky movie, but it did the trick, and you really made a lot of contacts with a lot of upcoming fighters at that time. That was pretty much one reason. When you compare that with the training methodologies of classical karate and kung fu at the time, my wrestling and boxing was a lot more fluid, and of course there was a lot more realistic contact. And so I really couldn't get into the classical and unfortunately more popular karate and kung fu styles. It just didn't work for me. I mean, I'm not putting it down because I think all styles have definitely merits when it comes to total fighting and total combat, and as we've seen in MMA. But for me at the time, doing kata and not really doing a lot of both stand-up and ground aspects really didn't work for me. So I opted for Muay Thai and Kosen Judo. I did a little bit of Savat. And the Kosen Judo was more of a combat judo style that emphasized Newaza techniques, which consisted of ground fighting and submissions. A lot of that stuff you weren't seeing in your karate and kung fu.
Not at all.
And not at all. And going back to my wrestling base, I just felt that this was really more of the fluidity in fighting that I wanted. I looked at the classical karate styles, and it was just too stiff for me. The footwork was
it's goofy. Nothing awakens the soul than watching two people grapple. I swear to God, and I don't even do it. I'm just a commentator and announcer. But when I see it, it harkens me back. And once I started researching you, because I'm getting to interview you here, I was like, whoa. And I mentioned your name to some people that are, big in MMA in Michigan. They're like, holy shnikes, how would you get him on the show? He's like, I have a former Pankration champion that referees for us where I work frequently. And it's just, you're just totally right on with this. I'm really following you here. I really enjoy hearing this from you. And thank you. And continue. I just want to interject.
Oh, sure. If you've ever been in a street fight, you know that stand-up striking isn't enough. And, a lot of the fights are going to end up on the ground. And, I'm not going to say 90% of it like when BJJ first appeared on the scene. They were saying 90% of all fights end up on the ground. So I'm not really going to say that that's accurate. But in a lot of cases, your balance, there's a lot of things that can happen in a fight. So you have to be prepared to go to the ground. So, my boxing was limited by the hands-only format. The wrestling forbade strikes. So, and in my mind, because of the street fights I had been in, you have to be ready for anything when confronted with a real threat. So, these all started working into it. But, I had my boxing, my Muay Thai and my boxing for my stand-up. I had my wrestling and my Kosen Judo, for my ground stuff and the submissions. But, I really didn't have a particular system that I was doing. So, being, very, curious, I started looking into my own background and searching into my Greek ethnicity. And this is where I kind of rediscovered Pankration. That was back in around I'm dating myself here, but 67 or 68. And, I just, I was very fascinated, and I was, brought up in a strict Greek household, and my father was Spartan lineage, so, he every day he drove it into my head, be proud to be Greek, and so I thought I was on to something. I'm there, there's nothing out there that's really combining wrestling and striking in one system. So maybe I'll just, call what I'm doing Pankration. And, I studied a lot of the ancient remnants, that the Greeks had left to us. And I started rebuilding an art as opposed to just some, amalgam of things picked from here and there. I wanted an art.
Rather than it just being a terminology, you made it something. You changed the pronunciation.
Yeah. Well, anybody can use Pankration. It's a catchy term. Back then it wasn't. People thought I was nuts. But I didn't care. It kind of fueled my efforts, and I just kept saying, no. This was an ancient art, and it's vanished for thousands of years. I'm going to try to bring it back because I'm very proud of what the Greeks contributed to combat as a whole. So, and getting back to my wrestling, this is where I was really proud of what the Greeks had done because, wrestling goes back to, even before the Greeks, but the Greeks really organized wrestling as an Olympic sport. And then, of course, and that was in the earliest Olympics around 708 BC, and then they added boxing in 688 BC, and then, of course, Pankration, a combination of the two, in 648 BC. And for me, Pankration was really a total form of fighting, and it covered all the bases if you were going to be involved in some kind of a street altercation.
It's applicable to real life.
Well, it is. But a lot of people back then didn't believe that. They just felt if you had this one-punch striking power, and I always worked on a one-punch striking power, but when you got into a street fight, that one punch didn't always work. So a lot of times it went into a clinch and bang, on the ground you were. So, and I got to tell you something else that I don't really tell many people, but I'm still very proud of it. I was probably in my early teens, and I started working with some catch wrestlers, and they were actually making a living as professional wrestlers in the old WWF. Remember them? The World Wrestling Federation under the McMahons.
Like the original Sheik and some of those guys.
That's right. And
Bobo
these guys,
Brazil.
Yeah, these guys, Bobo Brazil, Bruno Sammartino, Lou Thez, Kelly Kowalski, Haystacks Calhoun, Jimmy Snuka, all these guys would come in to my dad's restaurant, which was next to the Palace Theater. And they took a liking to me because they knew I was a fighter and I was really involved in learning. And before their matches, they'd take me over and they'd teach me real wrestling, not the stuff they were doing like hitting each other over the head with a chair. But they were showing me good stuff, and a lot of it was this catch wrestling. And I'll tell you something, that to me just doesn't get enough credit because that is an amazing combat sport when it comes to grappling.
Oh, when you see a catch wrestling tournament where there's youngsters fighting, holy crap! It's really a different element than just like a high school wrestling tournament,
Oh, absolutely, sure.
Sweet, you got a great point there. Well, and then so what I would have to say then, so as being a newcomer like myself, this sounds just like MMA. So what's the difference between Pankration and MMA?
Well, first off, there's a lot of similarities. Let me just clear that up. But of course, I was doing it 40 years ago. And in the beginning, it was more wrestling than boxing, and then it became more boxing than wrestling, and then I tried to equalize the balance, and I found, well, you really can't. Fighters are going to have a strong base, but I always tried to balance it so that, maybe you might be 60% a better striker, but you still knew your groundwork and your grappling techniques, or vice versa, And I just found that even training students, and even with myself, you could never predict a fight and how you were going to go, and you just wanted to make sure that you worked on a strength advantage. You tried to exploit the opponent's weaknesses. If he was a better striker and he knew no grappling, then of course you're going to grapple him. But on the other hand, if he was a good wrestler, and we were bringing in guys to train with all the time, and some were just grapplers, some were just strikers. Nobody really had a real solid knowledge of both together, so that we were able to really develop this strength.
Well, you started it. I mean, how could they? Nobody would. I mean, nobody
was doing this.
You couldn't have it. I mean, that's awesome, dude. I'm so thankful for this. That's amazing to me. And this is like, what, 73 when you got into your heyday or really started getting popular with the Mexicans?
Well, actually, it was earlier than that. It was about 69, 70. And I actually made the cover of Black Belt in 73, but we were doing this a lot before then, right? All right. Because,
so while everybody else is tuning in, turning on, and dropping out, you're showing up, gearing up, and kicking ass, huh?
Well, I'll tell you, they were wars back then. We had some real, the attrition rate was high. I mean, I didn't have no 200 students, 300 students like in all of the karate schools, but, we had a hardcore following, and most of these guys were They just wanted to fight. I mean, it was like a fight club, an exclusive fight club. It wasn't, this traditional studio that you'd go to, and every night you'd learn certain moves. I mean, yeah, I might teach certain techniques, one night a week, and then the next night we were just applying them. We were fighting. So, it was applicability was number one. So.
Yeah. And it's a great way to do that. And now, you had mentioned something about the Olympics earlier, and following through with this, now that we've established that there's a solid difference, because what you were doing was more like along the lines of what evolved into Pride and real no-holds-barred fighting, without a bunch of rules put on it.
Let me clarify that, though, because, I still tried to bring in some of the elements of the old Pankration, but I did it with safety precautions. We wore 12-ounce boxing gloves or the old Kempo open finger gloves. We wore military headgear, cups, mouthpieces, and we pretty much went at it. But, we didn't say we're going to fight in a ring, because I really didn't believe that a ring was a reality-based situation. So we sparred on sand or on hard pavement. Anywhere I felt a battle, might erupt. So,
that's awesome.
Well, yeah, I was, but again, remember back then, especially when that black belt cover story came out, I was, not part of the in crowd, so I was looked upon as being a little bit, unusual, let's say. So we never had the luxury of padded mats all the time. I didn't want my students to become comfortable. I wanted them to really feel what it was like to fall on the ground and then have to defend on the ground. So we had to simulate reality as close as we could.
That makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. So then you had mentioned the Olympics and, Pankration, the reason that you got kind of inspired was that, from what we do know, and of course in civilizations before that, I'm sure it was popular because the Greeks just adapted to what was already there, and that other stuff fell into the water and shit, blah, blah, blah. But, one of the most spectacular events in the Olympics was the Pankration. And do you believe that either a form of Pankration or even MMA will get into the Olympics anytime soon?
Well, that's always been my dream, but, right now, the way it appears, it's pretty doubtful. Even with, the tremendous popularity of MMA throughout the globe, I think the IOC just finds the nature of MMA a little too violent. And, their concern is safety. So MMA, if it ever was to get in there, would really have to be watered down. I mean, some of the more dangerous techniques, striking on the ground would have to be out. I mean,
it'd be like Golden Gloves. It's cool to know somebody, but it's kind of boring.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I don't think they'd really embrace competing in a steel cage either,
It goes against the Olympics now, because now they portray this big image of peace and how, it's diplomacy and it's getting along and it promotes, sportsmanship. I guess I get where they're coming from. And judo is pretty cool. I enjoyed the shit out of some judo and even wrestling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, right. Yeah, that was exciting.
Jim, that was
I will mention this, though, if we go back a little bit, when the Athenian Games in 2004 came up, there was an opportunity for Pankration to be entered as a medal sport. And the Greeks kind of jumped on the bandwagon because, and I'm sure you know this, but whenever an Olympics host site is announced, they have the chance to introduce a new sport, and whether it's ping pong or whatever new that they throw in there, it's got to offer good athletic competition. They've got to adhere to what they call the Olympic ideal. And that ideal, which actually goes back to ancient Greece, but it's softened up quite a bit, allowed them to come up with a sport that was combat oriented. So the Greeks at the time really were kind of new to Pankration. This was only like 2 or 3 years after the first UFC in 1993. In 1993, the Greeks said, hey, look, let's bring pankration back, or the way the Greeks pronounce it is pakration, and let's come up with a new format that is more of an amateur type status and with rules that the IOC will accept. The problem, though, is the movement kind of failed, and although they went on and on between 1995 and really up until the end, up until 2003, I think, the IOC wasn't really buying it, and they had kind of negated it right from the gate. So that's one strike. Will it ever get in there? Well, not unless some major changes are made. And knowing the IOC and some of the stuff that went on back in, the early 2001 era, it would really be tough to get them to buy MMA or even a watered-down version right now. But again, anything's possible, and I'm hopeful. That would really be a dream come true.
Well, Jim, talking about MMA as an Olympic sport and, maybe, a watered-down version of it, I mean, the sport is still relatively new. It's still a baby, compared to a lot of other sports. I guess my question really is, do you feel that MMA has changed for the better or for the worse, in the 20 years that they've been competing, and how so?
Well, let me put it this way. It's much better than NHB was back in the 1990s, when it was more style against style, and to me it was a little more brutal, and the athletes really weren't conditioned the way you see athletes in the Olympics today. I mean, you see an athlete in the Olympics, you're talking about a lean, mean, athletic machine. And
if you see an athlete from the Olympics on the street, you know it.
Oh, you know it. And they're like, Greek gods in a sense, the way they're built, the way they move. And again, they're in their teens, their 20s. They're in the prime of their athletic life. Do I feel that mixed martial arts, has really improved or worsened? Well, I think it's better in the sense of the training technology and that we've produced better, well-rounded combat athletes. I think, you look at any of these guys that are training, and their skill sets and their conditioning levels are just phenomenal. We're talking about high-level, top-of-the-line athletes, no doubt about it. I think that is a major cause for saying that this is a serious athletic endeavor. And people are taking notice. Other athletes are all the time. They're saying, hey, look at these guys. They're built like bricks, and they can fight. And plus they're intelligent. If I really have to pick on any of the worsening features, I'm not too happy with when I read about some of the illegal drug use going on, which of course is typical in any sport, but I had hoped that wouldn't really affect something like MMA. I mean, it's not too rampant, but still, you got to be on the lookout for things like that, because you want to make sure that the reputation of this sport continues to be top class, because
continues to improve.
Because people really aren't going to take it seriously, or they're going to get either bored with it, or they're just not going to take it seriously, and it'll never reach Olympic status at that point. It'll remain a professional sport, but as we saw with Pankration, when Pankration went from the Olympics to being run by these professional guilds, that's what killed the sport. And the athletes were really doing some things they shouldn't have been doing. And we just don't want to see that to a sport as great as MMA. The other thing is I do notice that there's a lot of injuries going on, that are suffered in these training camps. And, when you've got a big bout set up, and one of the fighters a week before has to fall out because of a major injury, then you've got a problem, because the spectators start saying, and the enthusiasts and sports fans really start becoming like a Roman mob, and they start saying, well, this isn't good, and we just don't want to lose their support. MMA
then it creates a rift between the management and the employee.
Well, and we see that happening all the time.
UFC and their canceled events. I mean, that's what's happening right now.
Right. So I think that's got to be cleaned up a little bit. I think the way it's portrayed to the public also has to be done on a more professional level and not name calling. I don't think that's ever going to work, or really, the management tearing down your employees. I'm just not into that stuff, and I know a lot of the people that are MMA enthusiasts, and even people that I discuss with that are, high-profile martial artists. They just look at MMA in disgust. They still have their classical ties, and they just look at MMA as not being,
Now, are you strictly talking UFC, or do you know, or do you familiarize yourself with other organizations that are out there doing professional?
Oh, sure, Bellator. I follow most of them, the ones in Florida. We follow a lot of them, but it's when I go to a lot of these events where I am with, in quotes, traditional type martial artists,
right?
And they come from a lot of varying arenas, whether it's stand-up or the grappling sector. But I'm going to tell you, a lot of them see that MMA is lacking honor. And the athletes might have the discipline, but when it comes down to this bickering between management and the fighters, there's a loss of respect there because there's no honor.
Yeah. Well, there's no money in honor, is there?
Yeah, well, it all comes down to money. Really, when it's a sport, it comes down to money.
I hate to say that. I don't advocate that statement in any way, but when you see it, you go, okay, well, people get interested because Chael Sonnen's on there talking like a dipshit and getting knocked out in the first round.
Yeah, well, and nothing against Chael. I think he's a great fighter, but again, it just doesn't. You look more like a thug than a martial artist, and I think I don't care what you're doing. Even when we bring it to MMA, which of course is a sport combining various martial arts, the fact is the honor still is carried along with it, and you can't forget that.
Well, if you look at their champions right now, if you look at the major champions in any organization, you'll find that the majority of those fellows are like George St. Pierre. That's one of the top. I mean, if you have to rank the amount of honor for high-profile MMA fighters, George St. Pierre's got to be at the top of that list or close.
Absolutely. Good dude. Absolutely.
Anderson Silva. Even though he has a little fun sometimes, he
can afford to.
Yeah, certainly. His mind and his honor is intact. He's an honorable fighter. He's a great fighter. Junior Dos Santos, same way. I mean, these guys are, and it really backs up what you're saying by saying that, maybe there is no honor in it, and maybe you can make a sweeping, broad statement like that, but look at the champions and look at the best fighters. The mouths come and go. There's different names to the mouth always. It turns from Tito Ortiz to Chael Sonnen to Rampage Jackson to blah, blah, this guy and that guy. And if that brings in 10,000 casual fans and all of us benefit from it, are we the dishonorable ones?
Well, that's a good point. Again, let's look at it from the standpoint, what do the fans want to see? Well, they don't care how sweet you are in there. They don't care how honorable, although some will, but I think a lot of people just want to see a good fight. I think it's just coming down where you've got management, really kind of being dishonorable or disrespectful against trainers, referees, and they may be right, but why make it public?
And judges.
And judges, exactly.
It's one of the, but then if you kind of put it in contrast, and I know that Jeremy's got another question for you, but if you put it in contrast with other major athletic professional sports in America, it's not all that far off. You see Roger Goodell having to deal with players that are off, and he holds an iron fist. And then the referees, you got the replacement referees, the NHL, the same way. Management and employees. Matter of fact, I think you can put that on any demographic in America, and we might just be hitting some kind of nail with some kind of hammer here by saying that the rift between managers and employees is one of the biggest problems that we have in the business world. You know it?
True. Yeah, it's been a growing problem in our society for sure.
I'm feeling this revelation as I'm saying it. I'm sorry if it comes out garbled, but it's true. I'm feeling this as I'm saying it. Like I'm starting to realize, holy smack, this guy is right. This is more, and that's where, when you started this, you know, and I want to get right back into that, where you're fighting on pavement, where you're making it real, that shows me that it's a movement here. This is something that you just kind of become a part of, and you realize things as they come along, and some of them take longer to realize and some of them don't. But you have to be ready at all times. And I want to go out on a limb and say that I'll bet that in areas of the country and the world where MMA and Pankration are popular, there's less violence on the streets because nobody knows who they're messing with.
Yeah, true.
And those guys can get their direction.
I just want to jump in and shift gears really quick here. I had a couple other things I wanted to talk to Jim about before we go. We got about 15 minutes left with him tonight. Jim, you've got all kinds of accomplishments and world records and special feats, and you've done books and videos. You've written numerous books and had, I think, over 30 some odd instructional videos with Paladin Press and Black Belt Books. Are there any new projects you're working on as far as like books or videos or anything like that go?
Well, you know, I'm always writing. That's the thing. I do love writing. I love expressing myself. So I've got 2 new books in the works. One is almost completed on the history of Pankration. It really goes pretty deep, and it gets into weaponry and just a lot of things that you know, I've already written, 6 books, and I'm still coming up with through my research with new ideas that I can add that I've been saving, you know, because I just want to keep on putting out, you know, good quality material. Then I've got another book that I'm working on some of the body mechanics and tactics for engaging an opponent in combat, either, you know, in a sporting sense or on the street, and showing the differences between the two. And I've also got a bunch of videos I'm working on. In fact, I'm working on a script for another set of videos that you know, I might be doing sometime in 2013. And let's see what else. I got several articles, some geared for more reality-based mags, you know, where Pankration and MMA, I'm showing how they're adaptable to hardcore street survival, and so between, you know, teaching and my own 3-hour workouts every day, you know, I'm getting a lot of time to do some of my writing, and you know, the thing is, I continue to carry the torch, and this has been my odyssey, if you will, in life. So, you know, but I'll always say I'm a lifelong learner, and the more I can learn through research or with training with someone else and passing it on to another, that's what it's all about.
Well, and I'll tell you, and it shines through just from talking to you. I feel like I've met you, you know, and like you were speaking about your videos. You know, I've now that I'm on this radio show, and this has been becoming a part of my career, and being an announcer, I'm new. You know, I'm 4 years into this. I remember seeing a little UFC, but I'm a WWE guy. I enjoyed the entertainment part, and I enjoyed knowing they weren't really hurting each other, blah, blah, blah. It's, you know, I enjoyed boxing too. But once I figured out that they had ring announcers for this, and that's what I wanted to do, and then now it's my life. And I get to watch a lot of videos, man. And I'll tell you what, I rarely understand what the hell they're talking about because I'm not a fighter. My only fights were in the state-owned facility down, let's say. And I was a victim of, or not a victim, I had to do some time for marijuana when I was younger. So I had to fight in there. I knew nothing about it, but I'm a smart guy and I'm a learner, so I applied biomechanics to it. And I had a roommate in a 6x4 cell, or 6'9" cell that was 6'1", 300 pounds, and I just told him to try to beat me up every day. And we would do that, and then I learned how to fight in there. And that's the only time I've ever had to fight. So I know nothing about it, but I watched your videos. And not only was I intrigued by the fact that you just look like you got a good personality, you break it down so simply that when I was watching it, I wondered how I hadn't thought of this before. I was like, wow, that's right there. He just basically unlocked something rather than, you know, and that's what teaching's all about. And I really do, I'm going to start looking at this, and I feel as though I can learn how to apply these types of techniques as opposed to watching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu videos. You know, it just make no sense to me. And you have to expect the guy to do what you want him to. You know, I don't think any fight's ever like that, and you're right. And that's so cool that you did this. And
well, you know, I think that it helps to be articulate because, you know, there's such a science about all of this. It's, you know, you really got to put yourself in the shoes of the learner. You know, the observer watching what you're doing, and you gotta say, well, you know. And after all these years that I've been teaching, because I was also, you know, I was also involved in public education for a long time. I was a college professor. I was a math teacher in high school for a while. So I mean, dealing with people. I was even in corporate education with a big computer company where I was dealing with all of these sharp people all the time. And I feel no matter how intelligent one is, you have to break it down, and you have to make sure you make it as simple as possible, and then they can take it from there.
Yep, that's the way it works. Now, as Perm said, and I know we got like 3 or 4 more questions we want to ask you. So, you've accomplished some pretty unique physical feats, and I understand you even hold some world records. What's that all about, man? I didn't get to research this, and I kind of heard Perm talking about that a little bit. What do you got? How many world records do you have?
That was my next question.
Well, good question. I hold actually 2. One's a Guinness book, and the other one is an athletic record. You know, I was always an athlete, and I was good at push-ups even back in grade school. So by the time I was in high school, you know, I could perform them on using one arm with 2 fingers, but both my arms were on the floor. You know, so. But as my training intensified a little later on, I kind of continued to experiment with certain things because I've always been fascinated with the human body and its capabilities. So in, I think it was 1979, I set a world record at one of my schools in Boston. I did 45 push-ups on my thumbs in 51 seconds. Yeah.
Whoa. That's awesome. Did they come out and give you a bunch of stuff for that? Oh.
Well, they put my name in the book. That was about it. I mean, and I got a lot of press for it.
Well, that's pretty wild. Holy crap.
A few years later, they put you on TV, didn't they? And then
right. 3 years later, I was on the nationally televised Guinness Game.
I remember those shows. I remember those shows when they do that. Whoa.
Yeah. And I was on a glass elevated stand, and so that was a little tense. And you know, I was performing. I don't know. They must have had 200 people in the audience, something like that. And it was shot out in Burbank, California, and I broke the record. I did 61 in 47 seconds. And I mean, these are thumb push-ups. My fingers are really elevated. Yeah. If you go on Facebook or my website and you look at some of the shots, you'll notice these are real thumb push-ups, not faked in any way. That's for sure.
That's awesome.
And then, well, I outdid that though. I mean, I was always pushing the envelope. I wanted to see how far I could go. So, you know, after that world record, I was invited to appear in a lot of talk shows throughout the 80s, and they asked me to demonstrate, you know, pankration techniques and some of these fitness feats that I was getting known for, and my push-ups in particular. And by then I was doing one-arm push-ups using 2 fingers, thumb push-ups with my arms extended in front of me, and I could also do thumb push-ups with my feet elevated on a chair.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah. Well,
my God.
Again, I can't do them right now because we're doing this over the phone. But if you go on the website,
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, I mean,
holy crap!
I mean, I kept saying, look, you know, I see guys doing 1-inch punches, and I see guys breaking boards and bricks. Well, let me come up with something unique. Let me show how conditioning is very important in what I'm doing. And I really wanted to make a statement for Pankration that conditioning was essential. So these thumb push-ups really kind of did it. Now, in 1984, I did my ultimate push-up doing a thumb push-up on one arm. And And I got to the point by 86 I could do several of them, like 6 or 7 of them. Balance was the biggest factor. Oh yeah, that was tough.
I was just going to say, forget the strength. You got to have ultimate balance.
Yeah,
you probably got pipe fitters forearms, huh?
Right. The whole body has to be in sync. I'm always running, so you have to have great cardio endurance. But I'll tell you what really stopped me from doing any more. The body builds up such lactic acid that it locks, your body in place after your mind realizes, whoa, that's as far as you can go. And, geez, a couple of times I fell flat on my face and got a nosebleed because of it. But, because you're balanced on one thumb, you're 160 pounds on one thumb, so, it's there's not much stability there. But
no doubt.
Yeah, that's wild. Well, as you said, we can't picture you, but do you still rock that classic hairdo?
Yep.
Right now? Awesome. I really enjoy that. I'm growing my hair out right now, and it's going to look just like that if I keep going. And now you've
well, I tell you, I've been
me.
fortunate. I've been fortunate so far, but you never know. Tomorrow I might get a George St. Pierre buzz cut. Who knows?
No, Samson, you can't do that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You got to watch out if Delilah's around.
You got time to take a couple of questions from a few fans?
Sure.
All right. I had a couple of fans message me on our Facebook page, and the first one comes from Mark Beverlin in Silvis, Illinois. He asks, "Have you ever lost in an arm wrestling contest?" So, you've done arm wrestling too?
Yeah, of course.
Oh goodness. So, have you ever lost?
Well, let's see. Not to my recollection. I do a lot of reverse curls and wrist rollers, so I've got pretty powerful forearms.
You ain't going to beat a guy in arm wrestling that does thumb push-ups, man.
One arm.
Well, I make sure my arms are pretty well developed, the shoulders, the arms. Hey, I'm weight training all the time, and I think that, again, back then in the 70s, they thought I was crazy. Who's lifting weights in martial arts? That's going to slow you down. But they didn't understand the right way to lift. So I've always been a fan of bodybuilding and synergistically developing your musculature so that when you punch or grapple, you've got great grip strength and strong muscles are really the way to go. And I feel that's a very essential part of training.
Yeah, strong, lean muscles.
And I'm old school. I got to admit, I'm old school. I still work with free weights and machines, and I know plyometrics is really a big thing right now, and sometimes I incorporated a couple of exercises here and there, but, I still go back and I say, nah, I'm old school all the way because, hey, it's enabled me to do some things that a lot of others can't, so.
Well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the way it works. You've already done so much.
Alone. Amen.
Yeah. Well, you fixed fighting because it was broken. You brought something. You've honestly, I really think that if there's ever somebody that's doing a survey, that if they check the crime rate and put that alongside how many people do self-defense classes, Krav Maga, MMA, different in the area, I think you really have seen. And I'll tell you what, there's a tendency now. And I hang out with a lot of fighters all the time. And you know how it used to be. Fighters were always rolling up their sleeves and cleaning out a bar or something because somebody's being a jerk. Nowadays, you really have seen a lot more respect between people because you just never know who's capable of what.
And who's carrying the gun, right.
Yeah, that too. Especially here in Michigan, we got open carry.
Yeah, well, Florida's no different, so.
Yeah, that keeps people like me's mouth shut longer. But I don't drink, so I don't go to those places unless I'm sober, so it's easy. But I definitely wanted to say. Yep, go ahead.
I tell you, you can't because that's another thing I failed to mention before, but that's been written about in articles over and over again. How in the early days, when I was taking these challenge fights, or guys coming into my school and or my fight club and saying, hey, let's go. I ended up in court I don't know how many times, and I was always portrayed as the bad guy. I didn't go.
Well, they like to do that. They like to do that. It's written into state law that if you're a pro MMA fighter and you get in an altercation, your license gets revoked and crazy crap like that.
Absolutely.
That's our 2-minute warning right there. Shoot.
Yes, sir. That's our 2-minute boxing bail.
Well, I got a couple things I wanted to get out real quick. I wanted to definitely say thanks to Paladin. You reached out to Paladin Press, and I really want to thank you on behalf of me and Big Perm for that, and also Black Belt Magazine for posting links of this show and appearing here. And I also wanted to say that if there's any way that anyone's interested in learning this, that's listening in Florida or going to be down there, how do they get info on training with you?
Well, it's all listed on the website at www.jimarvanitis.com. Of course, I'm on Facebook. I've got a group page and a fan page, so they can get in touch with me there. All they have to do is type in my name, and
cool.
Just contact me in that way, and I always get back to everybody. So.
Well, that's awesome. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, listen, I just wanted to say thank you very much for joining the show as well. It's been an honor to talk to you, a true pioneer of the sport, something that I've been just such a huge fan of. And when I was given the opportunity to do this show, each and every week I get to talk to people, that I never imagined I would get to talk to. And again, I want to say thank you for sharing your stories, and especially the push-ups. The stories about that, it really interested me, and I thought that was just so cool, man, because I used to watch the Guinness show, and I didn't see that episode, but I'm going to go look for it and see if I can't find it and watch it.
Absolutely. It was a good one.
For sure.
Well, I know I learned a lot. This is the Butcher again, and I really appreciate it. You put the cobblestones down that I now walk on and make a living from, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for that, sir.
Oh, well, I appreciate all the compliments, and, hey, thanks for having me on, guys.
Hey, you're
Absolutely.
quite welcome. You take care of yourself, Jim, and have a great evening, and thanks again, sir.
All right, great. Take care.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye now. All right, Dave, I didn't disconnect you.